All right, well, thank you to everybody for joining us today. We are really excited to share our progress on the Cayuga Creek Stream and Floodplain Restoration Project with you today. So I'm just going to start with some quick introductions. My name is Emily Root. I'm the Director of Ecological Programs at Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper, and I'm also the project manager for Waterkeeper for this project. And also from Waterkeeper today, we have with us Sarah Koslow. She's an Ecological Program Manager, and she'll be helping out with the meeting today. We have a couple members of our consultant team, John and Hannah, here with us today. So Barton and LaJudas is a full-service consulting firm, which we have hired to help us out with this project. So they specialize in engineering, environmental science, planning, and landscape architecture. So you'll be hearing from them later in the presentation. And then for everybody attending, if you want to just do a quick message in the chat, just if you feel comfortable with your name and where you're from, just so we can learn more about you and where you're from, and just to test out the chat for later for when we do Q&A. That would be really helpful.
Yeah, and in case anyone can't find it, if you just hover the mouse cursor on your screen, there's a little toolbar that should pop up near the bottom, and you can click the chat icon there and then type in that box.
And then in general, if we will have time for Q&A at the end, so if you could just hold your questions until the end, that would be helpful, so there's not a ton of noise from the chat and stuff throughout the rest of the presentation. And then, so as long as everybody can see my screen, then we can get started. So just a quick overview of the meeting today. I'm just going to start with a bit of a background on the project and how it came to be, the project goal and our progress to date. We're going to give an update on the design so far. So again, we're really excited to share that. We'll go over the next steps and timeline, and then we will have some time for questions and feedback at the end. So just a quick overview of Waterkeeper for anybody who's not familiar with us. We are a local environmental nonprofit. We've been around for about 30 years, and our mission is to protect and restore our local waterways while connecting people to them. We have about 30 staff members working in over 50 different project areas. So just wanted to provide some context on who we are. I also wanted to take a moment to thank the town of Niagara and acknowledge their role on this project. We really wouldn't be able to do this project without them, so we want to just thank them for their support and partnership on this project. They've been really involved and will continue to be involved in every stage as we progress. So just wanted to acknowledge them as a major partner on this project. So I wanted to start by just giving a higher level overview of the Cayuga Creek system and the current health of Cayuga Creek, just to provide some context for this project and its significance. So Cayuga Creek originates in Lewiston. It's 8.8 miles long, so it drains from Lewiston downstream into the Little Niagara River and then into the Niagara River. It drains 34 square miles of land, so 34 square miles of land drain into Cayuga Creek and down into the river. So it's a pretty significant area. The creek corridor has been highly studied over the years, with over 70 reports and studies focused on the creek. And within these studies, it documents that over time, the creek corridor and adjacent lands have been impacted by development, modifications, and to the stream and adjacent floodplain, and also from pollution that's been entering the creek from a number of sources. So the impacts from these factors have contributed to problems such as poor water quality and flooding problems that have been observed throughout the creek corridor. So this is a bit of a zoomed in aerial of our project site, which is outlined in red along the creek corridor, so you can kind of see the context. The project area is located about 1.5 miles upstream of the Niagara River. So it's in the lower section of the creek. So you can see in this aerial all the developed area around the project area. And so this is showing how significant the natural area held within our project area is within the context of the creek corridor. The property where the project area is includes some really significant ecological values and very important habitats for amphibians, reptiles, birds. It's the habitat housed within this area is of very unique and significant value within the creek corridor. It's very, it's not found really anywhere else along the creek. So that's a really important thing I wanted to highlight. And I also wanted to show these historic one map and several photos. So the creek has gone through some changes over time within the project area. So as you can see, over time, the creek was rerouted from its natural channel. It was straightened, and then berms were built on both sides. So this has caused the water to be restricted within the channel, not allowing it to interact with the adjacent floodplain. And also the channelization of the creek has, it increases how fast the water is flowing through the channel. So I wanted to show these to show the changes over time within the project area. So in this map, you can see the current conditions of where the creek corridor lies within the project area. So you can see in the orange line, it kind of comes through the middle of the project site and makes a sharp turn. That is the current creek corridor. So you can see that it's been channelized and disconnected from the floodplain. So our overarching goals for this project is to protect and restore the significant property along Cayuga Creek in order to mitigate flooding, preserve and enhance critical fish and wildlife habitat, and create a natural recreational space for public enjoyment. So because of the size of this project and it's a very large undertaking, we have split the project into 3 different phases. So those are acquisition, the stream design, and then public access and stewardship. So the first phase, the acquisition phase, was completed in 2018 after many, many years of this site being a priority regionally and partners working towards advancing the site. It took a long time, but finally all the stars aligned and the property was able to be transferred to ownership by the town of Niagara for long-term protection. So that was a major win for the site to get it protected long-term. So now that phase is completed, we're in phase 2, which is the stream design and restoration phase, which is what we're working on currently and what we'll be focusing on today. So I'll get more into that shortly. And then phase 3 is public access and long-term stewardship of the site. So a primary goal of the project is to improve public access in the creek corridor and in the greenway and provide a natural recreational space for outdoor activities. Another important part of phase 3 is the long-term maintenance and stewardship of the site in order to ensure the restored assets are maintained for future generations. So currently for phase 2, we've raised a little over $900,000 in funding for the design and implementation of the stream restoration. We have a little, I don't know, not a little bit, we have more funding we need to secure in order to implement the restoration. We have a grant pending for that right now. So we will be hearing about that in December. And so as long as we get that funding, we'll have everything, all the funding secured for this phase 2. And we were also able to secure funding to support the design of the trail system so that could be considered in tandem with the restoration work. So we'll be sharing those details as well today. So I shared the overarching goal of the project earlier, but for this phase 2 of the project, it's a little bit more of a focus goal. So design and implement stream and habitat restoration and floodplain reconnection along Cayuga Creek in order to reduce flooding associated with the creek where possible and establish functional aquatic, riparian, wetland, and upland habitats throughout the property. So in general, the opportunities for restoration that we want to accomplish through this project are to restore the natural function of the stream within the project area. So this includes reconnecting the stream to its floodplain, improving habitat both in the stream and in other areas of the property, so the forested, wetland, and grassland habitats. And so the next slide shows our current project design. So we are at about a little more than 50% design. So there's still some more detail to be added to it, but we thought it was a good chance to share the design at this point. So up until now, our design consultant developed 3 different designs, which were extensively studied and considered and shared with technical experts and discussed with partners. So all the elements have been carefully considered and prioritized to come up with what we have currently, and a design that is ultimately the most effective in achieving our project goals. So this shows a conceptual overview of the stream restoration design. So as you will see, the dark blue line is where the stream will be rerouted from its existing straightened channel to a more natural and sinuous channel. And the sharp bend in the creek will be transformed to a more gentle curve. There also will be a berm created along the southern portion of the property, so you can see that outlined in a darker gray. And so that will reuse the excavated material on site and keep overflow from floodwaters within the property. So this design provides the greatest amount of stormwater retention. It reconnects the creek to its historic floodplain, slows the flow of water, and creates important habitat. And it's also important to note here that there are limitations to the amount of flood reduction that can be achieved through the project that are associated with factors outside of the project area. So I just wanted to note that, but that this design does achieve reduced flood levels to the greatest extent possible within the project site. So our consultants are going to get into some more detail of this in just a moment, but I first want to share the draft master plan, which includes that stream restoration design I just reviewed, as well as the public access elements too. So, so you can see some of the trails that are shown here. So we actually broke the trail system into phases as well, because if we kept it as one, it would take a long time to raise all the money to implement all of it at once. So we wanted to break it out into pieces we could implement in phases as we are able to secure the funding. So the phase 1 trail is what we would like to implement first, and ideally at the same time as the creek restoration. So those areas are shown in the white dashed line here. So it would create over 4,000 linear feet of trail. It would be 8 feet wide and fully accessible trails. And then you can see also phase 2 and phase 3 trails here. So phase 1 trails incorporate resting areas, educational opportunities, 2 trailheads, and it carefully considers and complements the stream restoration components. And then the phase 2 and 3 trails also include things like a bridge over Cayuga Creek, a parking area, a creek overlook, and a fishing platform. And then here are some precedent images to show some visuals of examples of what we'd like some of these elements to look like once they are completed. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to the BNL team to talk a little bit more about the stream design.
Thank you, Emily. Let me make sure I'm unmuted. Yes, I am. I'm John Sundquist from Barton and LaJudas, and I'm an engineer with Barton and LaJudas, and I'm going to present some information on how we came up with the design and what we think it will do, what we predict it will do once we have the construction completed. There's a lot of information on this figure, but what I'm showing here is how we predict floods happen both under the current situation and under the redesigned situation. And what I'm going to be showing on this and then the next two slides are flooding that comes from a what we call a 100-year storm. That's a storm that you can consider either happening once every 100 years or every year there's a 1% chance of it happening. So that is kind of, I'll use the term worst case scenario for flooding, because with only a 1% chance per year, it can also be modeling done. We have done some modeling for more frequent storms where we get much less flooding, but I wanted to show the worst case scenario. So we, as Emily mentioned earlier, we looked at a couple of different alternatives to redirecting the creek, whether we should just let it overflow, whether we should create additional channels, etc. As we suspected, creating this additional channel that she showed on an earlier slide does actually provide the best retention of the flood. And the way we predict this is we actually use computer modeling to predict it. And this is something that is routinely used not only for the stream restoration projects such as this one, but we use it routinely, for example, bridge design, where we have to try to determine what the effect of a bridge will have on flooding or backup or flow of a creek underneath the bridge, and other similar scenarios. The way these models work, they're computer models, and they take information that's available from the federal government about the flow rates, historical measurements of the flow rates, and we combine that with a survey. We did a topographical survey that gives us the elevations of the properties, of the whole area around this area, and by putting these together, and there's a number of other parameters that need to be considered, we can predict when a creek will overflow, how far it will overflow, because we know how steep or how shallow different parts of the land are, so we know how far the water will flow, and we know how much water we have, so we know how far it goes. It's a little bit challenging on this site because overall it's fairly flat in this whole area. I mean, as you know, Niagara County is in general a pretty flat area. It's former lake bed in Lake Tonawanda from the glaciation era. So small differences in elevation can make a big difference, but the model results are still very useful for predicting what happens. What we have on this figure, I'm going to draw your attention to 5 different elements. The first element I'd like to draw your attention to is the black line. That is, as Emily showed on previous slides, is the property that the town has acquired, and this is the area where we have to work with. And so it's somewhat limited. We don't have all the property that's undeveloped in this area to work with, but we have most of it, and we can do a very good job on that with this property. When we get a 1 in 100-year storm now, our model predicts that the area of flooding from Cayuga Creek is demonstrated. Well, okay, let me back up. Item number 2 I want to point your attention to is the thin blue line you can see through here. That is the existing channel. That is where the creek currently flows. And so under the current conditions, when we have a storm, 1 in a 100-year storm, our model predicts that the flooding is around this white line. You can see there's a faint white line that goes all the way from the left side of the figure all the way to the right side. And it covers much of the mobile home, well, about half of the mobile home park, It covers a lot of the forested area in the property that we're looking at. It covers some of the land on the west side of the property, on the west side of the creek, and some of the area over Robert Drive. Our model, we've also used our model, the same model, to look at what happens after we make the changes. The changes will provide the darker blue, or actually thicker blue line, which is the proposed creek channel. That's the fourth thing I'd like to draw your attention to. And not only do we put this new channel in, but we do modify the contours of the land somewhat so that it's easier for the water to spread out within this area inside the property that has been acquired by the town. So that's why, even though with the same amount of precipitation coming down, even with the same amount of water coming in from under the bridge of Porter Road, we can reduce the amount of flooding, not only in area, but in depth, which is something I'll get into on the next two slides. But I wanted to show this slide first because it shows a direct comparison. Now, the purple line, which is the last item I'd like to point out on this, is the extent of any flooding that we would get anywhere under this worst case scenario flooding. Now, it does show there is some limited flooding still in the mobile home park, but it is, not only is it smaller, on a subsequent slide I'll show you, it's going to be much, much less severe. It's also, it doesn't change much the area that it's flooding on the property, but it actually stores more water there, which is how we can reduce the extent of the flooding. The extent way to the west is significantly reduced. Previously, under the existing conditions, it extended all the way to the left there, and that's because there's a drainage ditch that extends from there that goes underneath Tuscarora Avenue and then enters the creek, and so that would be backing up under the existing conditions, and that would no longer back up. So these are the two two types of models that we've run. Actually, we've run quite a few, but this is probably even quite a bit of information. I'm going to show you a little bit less information or different information on the next slide. Could you go to the next slide, please, someone? Okay, this is the same information, but only for the 100-year storm during the existing conditions. Now, again, this is a computer model. It's not real life, and so there's some things that look a little bit strange on it because it can't capture real life exactly. For one thing, it doesn't look like there's flooding on either side of the creek, but of course there is, and that's only because the way the computer program works, it does it differently for the creek, where it's looking just down the center line of the creek versus one-dimensional versus what's outside of the creek, which is more two-dimensional as it spreads out. So it does slightly different algorithms, slightly different calculations in those two different areas, which is why they don't connect. But but the other thing that this figure shows that the other one doesn't is shown by color, and that color represents how deep the flooding could be under different scenarios. And on this case, the prime scenario, it shows in the mobile home park, we have up to the color light green, which you can see in the legend on the bottom, shows like approximately 2 feet of water could accumulate in much of the mobile home park. And not over the entire area, but it could get quite deep. It could be damaging flooding. And then as I'm not sure how many of the people in the audience are from that mobile home park, but I know you've experienced this and it's been unpleasant. And this is definitely the prime importance of the project is to alleviate this. But other than that, this area here on this figure does correspond to that white line that was on the previous figure. Now, Emily, could you please go to the next one? This is what happens after we implement our proposed revisions. Now, not only can you see the location of the creek has changed, but the colors within the town property, the newly acquired property, are more of that green color, which is good because that means the water is being stored on the property there on a temporary basis. It will eventually flow out of that property and go downstream when the storm is over. But here, at the height of the storm, that happens only once every 100 years, most of the water can be contained. As I mentioned, our model does show some water still getting out into the mobile home park, but the color you see is very light blue. We're talking on the order of magnitude of inches of water here in the worst case scenario. So this has significantly been reduced. We also have about the similar level still at the southern end of Robert Drive, I'm sorry, which is lower than the rest of it, and will back up there to a certain extent as well. This alternative, compared to the other two, provides the best amount of storage possible, and it is why the waterkeeper has elected to go with this and to raise more funds to do this more involved construction project. But the results of this computer modeling demonstrate the benefits that will give to the surrounding neighborhood in terms of flood reduction. In addition to that, by moving the creek and changing the contours of the land and allowing more of it to flood on certain areas, actually increases habitat value of the area, which is also a benefit of the project. And that's, with that, I'll hand it back to you, Emily.
Awesome. Thank you very much, John. I just have a couple more slides to go through before we get into questions, and I can go back to any of these slides as we talk at the end. So let me just wrap up here. So just to go over our next steps and our timeline. So we will be continuing through the design, finishing the design and the permitting process through the end of this year and early next year. Like I said, we're still waiting on a bit of funding for the implementation of the design or of the stream restoration, but our goal is to get that started to break ground next summer, around next summer, maybe fall. And then also our ultimate goal is to get the phase 1 trails implemented at the same time as the restoration. That's also contingent on funding. So this is really our goal right now. It may change just depending on how things flush out. And then once the stream restoration is complete, we can begin our stewardship events, and we will plan to continue those long term. And then the phase 2 and 3 trail components will be implemented as when we have the funding secured for those items. So how can you get involved? Right now, the most immediate way to get involved is to fill out our follow-up survey. So if you pre-registered for the meeting tonight, you'll be getting that link sent directly to your email. If you didn't register, you can either find the link to the survey on our website here, bnwaterkeeper.org/Cayuga Creek Restoration with a dash in between those, or you can just reach out to me directly. And that way I will have your email. We can follow up with the survey. And then that way we can keep you posted on upcoming opportunities, updates on the project, and how you can get involved. We'll also be posting a link to the recording of this meeting on this website. So if you have any friends or family that would be interested in learning more about the project, please spread the word to them as well. So I just want to wrap up by saying thank you to everybody who attended, and want to say a special thank you to our partners and funders. I've listed our funders just for this phase of the project here. So you can see there's a lot of different entities that are providing support for this project. So we greatly appreciate their support and wanted to acknowledge their contributions. So with that, I think I will open it up for questions, and let's see. I wonder if, Sarah, do you want to do questions in the chat or?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, so if anyone has any questions, please feel free to use the chat function. You can go ahead and type them in the box and we can read it out loud. If you can't figure out how to get that to work, or if you're just calling in from your phone, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question that way as well.
I got a question.
Sure.
Okay, I got a couple of questions, in fact. One, one is you were talking about where the water was coming from, like from Lewiston and in Wheatfield and through town and Niagara and out. Couple of meetings I went to, they talked about the air base. And the air base did a lot of construction. And one of the things that they were supposed to do was put a retention pond on the air base, which they never did, to hold back some of the water. Did you ever look into what effect the air base has on the water coming through there?
It's definitely been studied in one of the many studies that have been completed for the creek. I didn't know about the retention basin, but yeah, I guess something we can look into. I'm not sure the feasibility of them adding that in at this point, but
Yeah. If there were a retention basin on the base, then that would affect how much water would come through at one of these 1 in 100-year storms or 1 in 25-year storms, whatever. So
Yeah.
that would change the input that would go into the mathematical computer-based modeling that we would do. So by retaining some water on the site, it reduces how much water is coming under the bridge at Porter Avenue onto the site. And that would show up in the modeling. It would show up in less flooding if they retained water on there during a storm. So that's how it would be impacted. As far as we know, there aren't any plans for such a retention basin on Cayuga Creek on the base. So we did not assume there would be one, and that's why we assumed that all the water was still coming into the site.
Right.
But you are correct, sir, that if they did do that, it would help the situation. But that is not part of this project.
Okay. One other question I got. Now, once this project's completed, that's going to negate some of the flooding that's going around, right? Now, according to your map, does that help? Does that mean that we don't have to get flood insurance for the homes?
I'm not sure specifically how it affects insurance. That's something we can talk to the town about more and investigate that.
Yeah, because I'm sure the banks will still want anybody that has a mortgage or wants to get a home equity loan to have flood insurance. But if this project's supposed to alleviate the flooding, then that should stop the need to get flood insurance for those loans, I would think.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on insurance. I mean, so I can't answer your question, but I do know the way it works is that the FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Association, will develop flooding potential, and that estimate of flooding potential then factors into the need for insurance or the cost of insurance. When changes to drainage are made, that can be updated. I don't know if they're going to plan on updating it after this is done, or how fast that would happen, or how quickly any new results would be incorporated. But
yeah, if you got to talk to FEMA, forget it, I guess.
It's something we can try to look into, and we can get back to you via email.
Yeah, it's I'll just throw that out as a consideration because I don't have flood insurance because I don't need it, but other people that I know have to get it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
In the area of Roberts Drive.
Those were great questions. Does anyone else have any questions?
Yeah, I got another one.
Oh,
Go for it.
Okay, when you start this construction of it, what's the access to the land? Is it off of Porter Road with the machinery or whatever you're going to use?
It's a good question. I think we're still drilling down those details. John, do you know?
Yeah, no. The problem is that the access from Porter Road is very, very narrow. It's immediately right next to the creek, and it's not a good way to access it in. So the best way to access, and most of the work will be done more towards the south, as Emily mentioned. We're going to be putting in a berm because we want to store the water on the site, but we don't want the stored water to spill into the mobile home park. So a lot of the work is going to be more down that way. So the access will be is planned to be from Elderberry Road, that area.
Where?
Well, from the mobile home park, from the south.
Oh, from the home, from the, okay. From the
Yeah, we
trailer.
still need to confirm that, discuss that with the town and
Right,
confirm
right.
those details, but that's a very good question and something
Okay.
we'll be considering as we move into the next stages of the design.
Okay.
So it looks like we have a question from Joan Johnson. What kind of fish do you expect to move in? And is there any future plan to expand the project area to include the neighboring woods?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, so northern pike is a key species where we'll be designing the habitat for, as their habits and conditions are very, basically if you design for northern pike, you're designing for many other fish species. So that's kind of our target species we're thinking of. And then with that, obviously we'll create habitat for many other warm water fish species. So, and then the future plan to expand the project into the neighboring woods. So that is something we are hoping to, we're having conversations about now. We would love to be able to do that. So we're just kind of looking into it now. It might be a bit into the future, but definitely something we are considering.
Does anyone else have any questions? And again, if you start to reflect on the presentation a little later tonight or something and some questions come into mind, please feel free to email Emily.
Definitely.
You predicted the dog would come.
Going after the cat now.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for your time and your interest in the project. We really appreciate you attending today, and we look forward to connecting with you in the future as well. Oh, we got another question. Would a water retention pond help?
Well, the design that we have essentially does create a ponded area during the flood events. The problem with actually creating a pond is that the soil in this area is very low permeable, very heavy clay, and if you actually excavated a pond, saying the pond will be there to retain it, it would just fill up with rainwater, and it's essentially would be it wouldn't be there would be no space available to take oncoming water. And also, if you start digging down too deep, the information available tells us that groundwater can start coming up, and you would actually create a worse problem on that. So that's why we haven't actually built a permanent pond like you see on some developments. But also, the fact is that during these large flood events, we essentially will be creating a temporary pond to store the water.
Would a retention pond help the Air Force Base?
I think that's a second question. Starting with the Air Force Base was suspected of releasing massive volume of water. There's a lot of, as Emily said, there's a lot of information, and I haven't heard of any specific release. I don't know.
Sounds like what John may have been talking about before.
Retention pond, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome.
Thank you, John.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, again, thank you so much, and don't hesitate to reach out with any additional questions or information that you would like, if there's anything we didn't cover today. And yeah, appreciate your time, and hope everybody